market forces. So I think it'll probably generate a debate, actually, in the US about how we define our interests, rather than lead to an automatic shift in one direction or the other. China and Iran, I know China has to be absolutely worried, obviously. And all the China experts I know think that they are worried about this, because there are people already writing about this as a global revolution. And by the way, there's a lot of evidence from other polities outside the Arab world, and outside even Iran, of momentum, being inspired by what happened in Tunisia and Egypt, and particularly Egypt, because Egypt has such a political and psychological presence globally in so many parts of the third world, Africa, Asia, the Muslim world, the Arab world. All of that is really important, and I think China has to be worried. But Iran is really fascinating, because Iran, on the one hand, is like, I told you so, it's all about American imperialism, and we're happy to see Mubarak, who was an enemy of Iran, go. And of course, then we saw what happened inside. And they have to be worried. They can say whatever they want. They have to be worried about the infection getting to them. I don't think Iran is similar to Egypt. Every evidence we have in our measure, I don't do public opinions myself, but I looked at public opinion in Iran very recently for a project, and I looked at 5 or 6 public opinion polls inside Iran. The regime has a very strong core grassroots constituency. It has very strong opposition. We can see how they're prepared to take risks. But they also have a very strong grassroots constituency. And the polls that were done about, could they have won the election, actually show, all 5 or 6 polls I've looked at show that the majority actually wanted the Ahmadinejad to win. And so, remarkably, I mean, we might say what we want, it's a divided polity. We don't know the extent of it, if they have a majority or they have a strong minority, but it's a divided polity. When you have strongly divided polities, the outcome is far more predictable. Here, it was not about divided politics, it was about we want more freedom. And it was universal regardless of ideology. That's not the case in Iran, and I think that things will go differently. Now, there's a question about what I said about strategic American interests from the lady in the back, whether in fact I said that we should stick to the way we define them, but adjust. That's exactly the opposite of what I said.
No, not should, but would.
No, that's exactly, well, I don't know about would or should. I think for now, the initial reaction is let's adapt. The initial reaction is let's adapt, because to change notions of national interest is so big. And I can tell you that when you even propose it to government officials, and they're literally going like 12 hours a day in a crisis trying to say, what statement should we make about this? What are we going to do about those Americans to pull them out of there? They're behaving constantly under meetings, the pressure of reacting, to think that they're going to sit back immediately and think about defining national interest. It's just not going to happen in the process. It's not the way the American system is defined. But it should lead to a redefinition. And that's going to happen by generating a debate on the outside first. It's not going to happen inside. People will start thinking about it inside, but that's what I'm saying about the war of narratives. We're going to have a war of narratives. That war of narratives is going to be interpreting what happened and then deciding how you're going to define the interests of the United States afterwards. In terms of public opinion, where the public perception is, perhaps, I don't know whether you came early or late, but I had said early on that there was actually a public opinion poll after January 25th in the US done by Gallup. And it shows a majority of Americans supported the public in Egypt over the government. And so there was public sympathy. And we see that in some ways in academic circles, we see it among the policy elites, not just public opinion, where there is sympathy actually with the Egyptian public on this one. And now that could change, if they start thinking that there's a Muslim Brotherhood hand, and the narrative starts changing about the Egyptian. But what we know about is it's not American public opinion that matters most. It's the opinion of those who care most deeply about an issue. On the Arab-Israeli issue, I do polling in the US as well. So my most recent poll I just conducted in November or December, just a few months ago, about how the American public stands on the Arab-Israeli issue. So one of the questions I asked them, would you like American policy to lean toward Israel, to lean toward the Palestinians, or to lean toward neither side? 68% say to lean toward neither side. This is consistent. We've seen it every single year. The overwhelming majority of Americans say we want the US to be even-handed on the Arab-Israeli issue. But when you ask them, but those who have an opinion, by a ratio of anywhere from 5 to 1 to 20 to 1, want the US to lean toward Israel over the Palestinians. Mm-hmm. And when you ask people to how high they rank the issue in their priorities, those are the ones who count most, then the overwhelming majority of those who rank the issue high on their priorities want to lean toward Israel. They're mostly evangelicals and some American Jews, but surprisingly, the largest segment is actually evangelical Christians in that group. So I think what happens on an issue like Egypt is not going to drive policy, because they may have an opinion, but they're not going to vote on that basis. And the people who are making the case for members of Congress are those who care mostly about that issue, and they're not going to have the same opinion. On Israeli-Egyptian relations, I can give you my own kind of prediction, which is a prediction, take it for what it is. Obviously, the relationship has already changed. It's not going back to where it was. I just don't see how it can go back to where it was. But some things will not change as dramatically. I think the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty has been mutually beneficial. I think the Egyptian military institution remains invested in maintaining that treaty. What will change is that over the past several years, the Mubarak government has become Israel's most important regional ally in coordination. In essence, Egypt has come to replace Turkey as the most significant strategic cooperator in regional and global politics, whether it was in the relationship with Iran, the relationship with Hamas. And so it was an active cooperation at a strategic level across the region. That has ended, in my opinion, and is not likely to revive in any foreseeable future. So I think there will be those two things coexisting with each other: the maintenance of a peace, but less active cooperation. Much of that's going to depend on what happens on the Israeli-Palestinian front. What happens on that front is going to obviously have an impact on Israeli public opinion and Egyptian public opinion in a way that no one can ignore. And I still think that the Egyptian public will look at that relationship through the prism of the Palestinian issue. In my own opinion, while the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty was a bilateral treaty legally, that Egypt always saw it as part of a comprehensive deal that included the autonomy of the Palestinians, and that it hadn't been fulfilled in the mind of the public here, and that has never changed. The last question, well, just a quick question on Wisner, which is, I mean, it was hard to know whether it was right to send anybody, even unofficially or not. My worry has been, and just as I said, you know, what my initial reaction was, I don't think the U.S. should even appear, or certainly should not try to engineer an outcome in Egypt, or appear to be engineering an outcome in Egypt. It wasn't an American issue. And the appearance of that alone was going to be problematic. And it became more problematic once Frank Wisner, who's a friend of mine and somebody many of you know, and I know him and admire him, the fabulous figure. Once he made that statement, it was very hard to differentiate where the government was and where he was. So in historical perspective, this will be seen as a little, you know, bump on the road of the Obama administration policy.
Professor Telhami, and actually let me express my admiration to the travel agent who designed his itinerary, because he spent only 3 days in Egypt, very important ones, and coming from Tunis via Paris. So I would like really out of that to suggest new tours like tourism, revolution tourism to Egypt, maybe starting from America, because he stopped over Paris, and you have to remember the revolution and the historical revolution terms of the French, including instigating revolutionaries in American history. And also he made sure that he's going to stay until Friday. So tomorrow he's going to enjoy a walk of a Friday in Tahrir Square. And I have suggested the same itinerary to be done and designed for revolutionary tours in Egypt. And I think you are going to bring your family also to Egypt instead of Europe, right? This summer. Thank you, Shibley, and thanks all of you. Thank you.